Elman, and I'm a member of the International Commission on Inclusive Peace for the Principles for Peace Initiative, and the lead convener on youth peace and security in the Commission. The Principles for Peace is a global participatory process to reshape global approaches to peace to enable more effective, inclusive, and sustainable peace processes. This conversation is a core part of our effort to engage, listen, and learn from young people across the globe to develop the new principles for peace. So for everyone that has tuned in today, you are participating in a global process, and your voices and perspectives today will help us shape future peace-building processes. To design this dialogue, we shared a survey to get your thoughts, perspectives, and questions on what peace means and what it should deliver. And we received an incredible amount of inputs spanning across 35 countries. So thank you very much to everyone who's already filled this in. My co-host today for this discussion is my friend and colleague, an incredible peace leader from Libya, Ms. Hajar Sharif. Thank you so much for joining, Hajar. And based on your responses to the survey, we can actually see where all of you are from. And the responses that we see, as you can see on the screen now, many of you are from Somalia, but we have participants from all the continents. You are a young crowd, as expected, with respondents as young as 17 who have joined us today. And 2/3 of you are young people that are women. As this is the first dialogue of the Peace on Our Terms global series, we want to start with a broader discussion on what peace means to you, what it should deliver, and how you think peace should be built. The next consultations will focus on more specific topics decided by you. You can follow the Principles for Peace initiative on social media to shape the next event with us and stay up to date on the progress the Commission is making in regards to rewriting the new Principles for Peace. Today, you'll be hearing from some really incredible people. And if you have any questions or comments, join the conversation in real time by using the hashtag Peace on Our Terms. Now, I'd like to turn to my co-host, Hajar. Hajar, could you please tell us a little bit more about yourself and your work and what peace means and should deliver, in your opinion?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Ilwad. And it's truly such a pleasure to co-host this event with you. It's good that we're also doing it online, regardless of the circumstances, so we can get more engagement. And I'm very happy to see that many people have filled the survey. So a little bit about me in a nutshell. I'm Hajar Sharif. I'm 29 years old, so I'm a little bit older than the average age of the crowd here. And I'm the co-founder of the Together We Build It organization. And it's an intergenerational organization working to promote peace and security by focusing on the significant role that women and young people play in conflict-affected areas. And our work is, of course, mainly focused on Libya. So to share with you what peace means to me, I would say my philosophy for peace is that peace is a public good. And what this means, it means that it belongs to everyone, regardless of how it looks like, regardless of what it means, regardless of the differences of how we as individuals even define peace. And since peace for me is a public good, it also means that it comes with rights to it. It means that everyone have the right to peace. This also includes that everyone, and this is something I strongly believe in, everyone have the right to participate in building, shaping, making peace. This is when it comes, for an example, to countries affected by conflict, where we see ongoing peace processes, efforts to build peace, but it also applies to countries that are not undergoing any armed conflict, so to say. So people also have the right to participate in sustaining peace. And in order for us to guarantee that people can practice their rights, it means that the work for peace should be done through a mechanism, a platform, should be done in an environment that will allow everyone who is interested in bringing their feedback, their input into peace. These people and everyone, regardless of whether they are, full-time activists for peace like yourself and myself, or whether they are ordinary people who have other jobs to do and are interested in so many other things, and they want to contribute to peace in a way or another. So the most important thing for me is that peace is a right, and everyone should be granted the opportunity and have the opportunity to participate in building, making, shaping, and sustaining peace.
Thank you so much. Very powerful statement there. Peace is a right. Peace needs to be inclusive and transparent for more people to participate than the usual suspects. And the data that we received from the survey is actually telling us very similar points as well, Hajar. Many people have linked peace to the freedom of movement, being able to move around without fear, and that this is the most important thing that peace should deliver to them. Second most common in the survey results has been that is the resolution of conflicts without violence, and that there is less violence and crime. We're hearing from young people that peace is more than just the absence of war. It's more than a political process, but one that is nonviolent, as you had mentioned, delivers necessary freedoms, such as movement without fear. So as to work towards developing the new standards of peace, young people are telling us already practical, tangible ideas of how to shift the peace building processes now. We also asked you to write down what peace means to you, to all of our audience online, and for you, Hajar, as well too. And some of the answers that we're seeing about what peace means to you. In the next slide, we are hearing definitions of peace also meaning something more than absence of violence. Peace also means a sense of well-being, openness, a sense of opportunity, and the ability to work together to improve your community and country. These are some of the responses we collected in the survey. But we want to continue to receive your input. So for all of you that have joined us today, use the hashtag peace on our terms and provide your answers on what peace means to you. Hajar, when you see these responses, what do you reflect on? What are your thoughts?
I mean, to be completely honest, when I read all of this, I just wonder why young people remain to be excluded from peace processes. Because as you mentioned, Ilwad, it's very clear that young people have given it the thought. They've experienced what it means to live through a war, but they also experienced what it means to build peace. And from what we're seeing here, it's clear that young people are experts when it comes to peace and security, and in particular, peace building. So my thoughts on this, I just cannot comprehend why young people are still marginalized and excluded from peace processes and formal peace building efforts, because from what I'm seeing, the answer to so many of the struggles and the conflicts that we're witnessing right now was on the screen right now. These answers were given by young people. And in order for us to redefine, or in order for us to actually reach an inclusive definition and meaning for peace, all of these answers needs to be put on the peace table in order for all stakeholders involved to take these answers into account.
I share your sentiments, and it's always very impressive to see that when young people are consulted, when they are engaged, that their recommendations or idea for the future of peace building is very nuanced, it's very gender sensitive, it's very cross-cutting, and young people are looking at the issues that ensure their well-being from a much more holistic perspective. We're now also in a context where there are resolutions specifically to the participation of young people. There are declarations and commitments. However, young people still feel challenged to participate in processes meaningfully. And that's what this consultation actually is about as well, too. The Principles for Peace Initiative recognizes that young people have a part and parcel role to play in building peace, and that we can't keep doing the same thing over and over again. And we need to match resources to the rhetoric of young people being part of peace processes. So we're very happy with the responses that we received. It demonstrates the capacity of young people. You are a shining example that young people are not just beneficiaries or implementing partners or even spoils of war or perpetrators, but you are active agents for peace building. And now what we want to develop in these principles is clear, precise principles to engage and inspire further action by young people. Based on what you've shared with us, we know that peace has many definitions and should not be thought of as a single event or a signed agreement. We want to move beyond this proverbial peace agreement table and look at peace building at a much more holistic and long-term undertaking. Peace needs to deliver on people's social and economic needs and aspirations in order for it to be legitimate. As such, many actors are involved in the peace building process that are working towards peace. Which actors do you think are relevant and responsible in contributing to peace? This is a question for you, Hajar, but also for everyone that's joining us live today. Feel free to hashtag peace on our terms to respond. What are your thoughts, Hajar?
You know, Ilwad, you've been asking me many questions right now, so I think I'm going to bounce it back to you. You have tremendous experience in this field, and I'm very interested to know what you think.
Well, thank you very much. I think that the face of peace building is still too old. I think it's not representative of those that are disproportionately affected by conflict. I feel that we invest a lot in actors that are not credible or legitimate or have skin in the game, essentially. But those that are the overwhelmingly affected are not in the decision-making processes to decide what the peace future should look like. And legitimacy to peace is a constant issue that we've been grappling with at the Commission. Why do we keep investing only in political peace and not social peace? Community leaders, young people, women, traditional elders, and leveraging the authentic and indigenous practices for building peace from the community instead of just forcing down global standards and global resolutions into a community that may not accept it. So I think there's a lot to be done on ensuring that we have the credible actors, the legitimate actors, being the ones to broker peace processes.
Absolutely. And I think it's fair to say that the face of peace is how the society look like. And the society does not look like, unfortunately, the peace tables we see on the news, for example, or the formal peace processes that we see, because the society is composed of all different actors, women, young people, and all different groups. And it's just fair to say that the face of peace is all of these ordinary people who are living their lives, who are doing everything they can, again, whether full-time peace activists or contributing in a way or another to bring peace.
Absolutely. So please also to the rest of the people in the audience, make sure you send us a message and respond to this question. Which actors do you think are relevant and responsible in contributing to peace? You can drop your answers in the comments section right now. But for now, I'd like to turn to Hiba Qassas, who is the head of the Secretariat for the Principles for Peace Initiative.
Hi, Ilwad and Hajar, and good morning, evening, afternoon to everyone who's with us online. It's really great to be part of this conversation, one of many conversations we will have as we are working to really get the voices and perceptions and perspectives of people, which is very important when we're thinking about coming up with a new frame of reference, a set of standards that would guide how peace processes are conceived and structured. So it's a real pleasure for me to join you, and very much looking forward to our conversation.
Well, Hiba, thank you so much for joining. I want to get straight into how the initiative is working towards leveraging youth ideas, and they're actually being meaningfully included in this process. The initiative has now completed 86 consultations, gathered over 93,000 insights in 10 countries. Could you tell us what are some of the key takeaways on responsibility and legitimacy of peace from the global process?
Yeah, thank you, Ilwad. What's really interesting, of course, we've been very committed from the very beginning that when we come up with this new set of principles or standards that should influence how peace processes are conceived and structured, that we bridge this really big disconnect between real society perspectives and expectations, what people whose lives and realities are shaped by conflict and the ramification of conflicts, and what the assumptions that prevail and inform and determine the kind of interventions that are out there by international actors predominantly, and really try and bring that gap slightly closer. And part of and that's really the rationale of why we launched these set of consultations around the world. And what's really interesting is that what's coming from these consultations, I think for me, it relates personally as someone who grew up in a crisis country. I'm Palestinian and I grew up in Palestine. And I've worked as part of the international system for many years. And I've seen it firsthand that, there are a set of assumptions around what drives violence, what do people expect from peace, and how you build peace, and who should be around the table, which are not always really connected to the reality and aspirations and expectations of people whose lives are shaped by conflict. And I think that's coming very clearly from the country consultations. And I'll share with you 3 to 4 findings. The first one relates very much to what came out in the survey that you were referring to together with Hajar. One is around the definition of peace. The definition of peace, and we've seen this from Afghanistan to Ukraine to Sierra Leone to Central African Republic, Nigeria, Yemen, the different countries where we've done these consultations, it was very clear that in the eyes of the people whose lives are shaped by conflict, the definition of peace goes way beyond the political definition of peace that a lot of the time determines how the international community or the elites proceed in these kind of power sharing arrangements, focusing on a political settlement. It goes way beyond, like you said, Ilwad, earlier, that some are associating it with freedom of movement, or some are looking at really the socioeconomic, the social foundations of peace, as those are the key things that peace should deliver. And of course, that there's a dichotomy there between what people are seeing as important and what the system and all power institutions are thinking or assuming that is important. And that's what dominates, what you and Hajar talked about, the narrow definition of peace around the absence of violence. It's much more than that for people whose lives are affected by violence. So that's one. The second one is really around national ownership, national leadership, and responsibility. And again, there's a lot of focus at the international level in talking about national ownership. But what came out from the country consultation, that any processes around peace should enable and also puts responsibility on national leaders in delivering the foundations of peace that would make peace take root and hold in society. And that disconnect is not always there in how also those who are involved in designing these processes. And the third one is around inclusion. That despite a lot of the hype and many of you and those with us who are very active in the peace and youth peace and security and women peace and security, there's a lot of the right things are said often. We need more women on the table. Inclusion is a priority for the international community and for national actors. But when it comes to the crux of it, as you said, these are very exclusive negotiations, elite bargains that bring mostly the violent actors around the table to broker some kind of a ceasefire or a political settlement. And what's happening and what we see, despite all this push on inclusion, that's still what we see are very exclusive affairs when it comes to peace processes. Despite all the push on women, peace and security, for example, women are only 2% of mediators and 9% of negotiators. So where are we from that? And how are we actually empowering the biggest constituency for peace, which are the civilian actors, the civil society actors, the young people who have, as you said, Ilwad, a skin in the game, who are looking for their prospects. So what came very strongly in these from these consultations is the need that these peace processes are broadened in their frame of reference to really not only incentivize violence and leave violence as the main currency of negotiations. So for you to secure your table, your seat on the table, you need to be a violent actor, but really to empower the civilian actors who are the biggest allies and constituency for peace. And this is what we're really keen on, as a Principles for Peace initiative, and you, Ilwad, and the rest of the commissioners are working very strongly to come up really with a frame of reference that broadens the frame of reference, in a way reclaiming what peace process is. That a peace process is not a political process, and that peace is not the absence of violence. It's much more than that.
Thank you so much, Hiba. And I think that you touched on some very important points that for many of us that are coming from conflict-affected states, myself from Somalia, Hajar from Libya, you from Palestine, we've inherited conflict that has been generations long. And young people today are, even in that climate, are trying to create a more prosperous and enabling environment for themselves, but are not given the access to participate. We're in a climate right now where all of the right things are being said, all of the frameworks are in place, but implementation, we're very far from. I'll give you an example from Somalia. Right now, we have a political stalemate where this last government's term was supposed to be done on February of this year. And since then, the country's been very conflict affected. Young people are being radicalized and used along tribal lines to push the agendas of unscrupulous war profiteers. But in defiance to that pull to be a part of the armed conflict, young people have started to organize on the margins, outside of processes that they have not been invited to. We see that every chance there is to mediate and implement resolutions like 1325, where women can be a part of silencing the guns, that we just resort to the fastest resolution. The patriarchy rears its head, and we just bring the same 5 men into the room and expect them to build peace. And I think that's what really drew me to this initiative as well, too. We have the right documents in place, but the implementation lacks. So now we need to find standards and principles that are more attuned to the realities of countries in conflict, to the cultures, to the people, and create pathways for peace building. Hadra, did you want to reflect on some of the incredible outcomes that Hiba just shared with us?
Absolutely. I mean, Hiba, everything you mentioned, I can easily say that it applies to the Libyan situation. And then other women and other young people will say it also applies to so many other conflict-affected countries. When I first started my activism when I was 19 years old, I remember throughout these 10 years, one thing that keeps coming up from, let's say, and I'm going to be completely honest about this, you know, our community of activists, whether in peace, whether in human rights, women's rights, etc., we always judge the others who are not activists, and we say, you know, we're not reaching where we're supposed to reach because people are change phobic. People don't like change. And it didn't take me too long to actually realize that even in our own community of peace builders and the peace building community, we're also change phobic, because many of the processes that we see taking place right now, these are not newly invented methodologies of how to achieve peace or assumingly reach or make peace. And I always wonder in the sense of, so there's so many processes that took place, for an example, that are solely focused on mediating between political actors who are fighting each other. There are so many of these processes that has proven to be a failure. But still, whenever there's a conflict and whenever there is a political will to solve this conflict, the first solution that it appears that everyone goes to, and by everyone I'm talking about the major powers, the major political actors, also international institutions, is, okay, let's bring these few men together. If we are lucky, those who are affected by the conflict, maybe they will remember to bring a woman and maybe a young person around the table, not even sitting on the table. And they just seem to go through this one methodology that has proven to not work. This is very from a pragmatic perspective in the sense that it's not working. But there is also another issue with this methodology or this way of doing peace. In my opinion, it actually infringes on people's rights. Because as I said in the beginning, there is a right to peace. And in my opinion, there is also a right to participate in peace building. And this goes under even political rights. Because for an example, if we look at Libya, there is no democratic political system that is happening where me or everyone else can democratically participate. And these peace processes are more or less, in reality, a substitute for the political system. So by bringing only few people, and mainly those who are either the leading political actors or those who are associated with them, we're literally not depoliticizing peace. We're putting more emphasis that peace is something political, while for the millions of people on the ground, it's not.
Well, Hiba, before we let you go, I'd like to ask you one more question. In backdrop to what I've shared, what Hadra has shared, and the frustration that exists globally, and the disillusionment in these global processes, what's different about the Principles for Peace initiative, and what can people expect from this process?
Ilwad and Hajar, as you're speaking, I'm thinking of feelings and ideas I've had for many, many years. I always talk together with the commissioners about the sense of fed upness. When people ask me what actually brought about the principles for peace to life, it's practically a sense of fed upness. A sense of fed upness of seeing us, as you said, apply the same solutions again and again and expecting different results. Seeing us doing in Libya what we know have not worked. Seeing us doing in Yemen what we know have not worked. Seeing us repeating in Mali what we know have not worked. So the idea and what's different around the Principles for Peace initiative this time is that we recognize that we failed for so long and that now it's the time to come together, learn from these mistakes, and together, both from the bottom-up process, but also in engaging with real politics, in engaging with member states and countries, in engaging at the heart of those political and international actors who are engaged in this process, in rethinking the approach to peace processes. So what we're trying to do, what's different this time, is that we're not taking an academic approach only. We're not taking a practical approach only. We're not taking these two approaches only. We're actually bringing in both the voices, aspirations from the ground up, but also we're bringing the hard evidence and realpolitik considerations. And we're bringing also, at the same time, the practical and practitioner perspective and trying to bring these three together so we hit multiple incentives and considerations that drive how these peace processes are conceived and structured. So if it's the evidence that resonate, we will use that. If it's the bottom-up pressure and the evidence that will resonate, we will do both. And we're not doing this alone. The International Commission is not the only entity together with the Secretariat who is doing this. There's over 120 organizations that have joined this effort, both globally, local organizations, various networks, including some of the UN organizations who are ready to also take a hard look at how they do business. So we're very optimistic that this will be that point, that building block that really moves us forward and creates the kind of pressure that is needed in order to start to shift the needles.
Thank you very much for joining us today, Hiba.
Thank you both. Thank you.
Well, we asked all of you in the survey as well, too, of what you think are responses to legitimacy of the stakeholders involved in peace processes. If we could look at the results here from the survey, we're seeing that youth, women, and non-governmental organizations are seen as the ones that most work towards peace. Yet these are precisely the actors that are too often excluded from formal peace processes. Conversely, the ones who are involved in the formal peace processes are very low in the list. I think this speaks exactly to the conversation we just had, Hajar, where we have the right provisions in place to include women, to include youth, to include traditional elders, but they're not meaningfully engaged. And that this is some of the shift that needs to happen as well, too, as we move forward. For the last session today, I'm going to invite 3 brilliant peace activists we have joining us today to also help us reflect on some of the questions we asked in the survey. We have Ariza Nukum, Mimoun, Barisun, and Hassan. Are we all there? Wonderful. Thank you all for joining this part of the conversation. Let us start with a quick introduction with everyone. I have the pleasure of knowing all of the activists that are here right now. And together, the group of us have worked together to build peace and offer our learnings to youth globally as well, too. Maybe we could start with a quick round of introduction. I'll start with you, Ariza. Where are you from? What's your organization's name? And very briefly, tell us what you are doing to contribute to peace.
Great. Thanks, Ilwad. So, hi everyone. My name's Ariza Nakum. I'm from the Philippines, currently based in Manila. So, I'm the co founder of an organization called CRIS that promotes peace through education and youth leadership in the Philippines. And right now, we're working on a chapter of Extremely Together in the Philippines, which has this year mobilized 500 young leaders to promote peace and to counter violent extremism. It's a very exciting time, and I'm so excited to share this with you all later.
Thank you so much. I'll loop back with you very soon, Ariza. Mimoon, where are you from?
Hi. So my name is Mimoun. I'm from Germany, and I founded an organization called 180 Degrees Turn. In Germany, the name is 180 Grad Wende. And we started in 2012 helping young people not to get radicalized or influenced by criminal groups. Yeah, and I will tell something about the approach later. Thank you.
Hassan, welcome.
Thank you so much. My name is Ndugwa Hassan, and I'm from Uganda. I work with the Uganda Muslim Youth Development Forum, which is a youth organization that I co-founded in 2011 after surviving a terrorist attack in Kampala. Our organization seeks to address the root causes of violent conflicts through trainings, through dialogues, through providing positive alternatives to youth that are susceptible to recruitment into violent extremist groups. We engage religious leaders and other actors like the police, government officials at local and national levels. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. Well, there you have it. This is the makeup and the global face of why young people need to be a part of peace processes. We're all coming from very different backgrounds. We all have very different thematic focuses on how we build peace in our communities, but we all face the same systemic exclusion and marginalization in global processes. This is what we hope to unpack today. And I'll ask my first question to you, Hassan. You are the co-founder and executive director, like you mentioned now, of the Uganda Muslim Youth Development Forum. Your work focuses on strengthening youth and religious leaders' capacities in conflict resolution, peace building, and the prevention of violent extremism. Hassan, you've heard what we discussed today, including the results of the survey. Could you tell us what would need to change to better support the actors working towards peace?
First of all, I think peace should not be forced. It should be felt and seen. For example, deploying troops on streets to crush dissatisfied individuals or peaceful demonstrators may not create a sense of peace among people, even when they quit their mission. So for me, young people experience the effects of violence and peace firsthand. Their education is normally halted in conflict situations. Upward mobility is curtailed. However, when peaceful young people are able to fulfill their when peace is available, young people are able to fulfill their potential and contribute positively to society progression. Therefore, they need to be consulted, and their input is vital for effective peace processes. But what actors need to do first, I think it's important that actors who work for peace and who work with young people need to understand youth. Youth are not a homogeneous group. We have youth in schools, we have youth in informal sectors, we have youth in formal sectors, we have youth who are educated and those that are not educated, we have youth that are unemployed and those who are unemployed and those who are employed. We also have youth who are women and male, and this understanding would help actors design programs that are effective to each group. But also, I think that actors shouldn't be working in isolation. Actors need to build strong coalitions that not only advocate for peace but collectively challenge repressive laws and actions against our smooth operations as those that are likely to escalate conflict or violence. I'll give an example. In Uganda today, government is proposing that all support from donors to CSOs should be directed through the cabinet. Cabinet ministers have to see it, then approve funding for peace. For civil society organizations. That is something that requires strong voices. That requires us to coalesce as actors who work for peace. But also, lastly, I think actors need to share knowledge and lessons. Of course, this will help us better our unique interventions in different contexts that we work in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hassan, for sharing. And really, on that last example you shared from Uganda as well, there seems to be a little bit of a juxtaposition between what we're seeing globally as priorities and calls for localization and inclusion, and then also the stark shrinking space for civil society when it actually comes to conflict-affected areas. So there's a lot of work still to do. And maybe this is a good way for us to transition to Ariza's work as well, too. Ariza, please tell us a little bit more about the Extremely Together chapter that calls for the inclusion of youth, and maybe what would need to change to better support your work as well.
Thanks, Ilwad. So these past few months, even with the COVID pandemic, we've actually been working really hard to train young people to become peace builders. And we've also been giving them resources like a network to support their work and even grants to help kickstart the funding for their projects and proposals for peace. And one of the setbacks that we've faced and we think has to change is the political climate, to be honest. So here in the Philippines, one thing that hinders the work of young peace builders is something called the anti-terrorism law. So it sounds great, but the reality is that the definition of terror in this law is so broad that terrorism could actually be, activism could actually be considered as terrorism in this sense. So it could be abused. And fear of this law is preventing young peace builders from carrying out their work. So one thing that has to change is the ecosystem, the government, the state, police forces, and law enforcement. We should also be working with them to promote peace. Otherwise, a lot of the projects that we do, a lot of the ideas that we have, a lot of the voices that we have are being silenced and oppressed. Back to you, Ilwad.
Well, I think the red tapes around peace building is a big challenge for many peace builders. The legal frameworks that actually demonize and punish young people that have access to those that are considered designated or part of armed groups is also a big challenge. In my context, we face this as a big barrier. In the consultations we've held with young people around the world, we're hearing them say that they want to bring all the different stakeholders at the table. They want dialogue, they want to reconciliate and build peace on the front lines. But the legal frameworks and policies that are so regressive and archaic, like the anti-terrorism law in the Philippines, prevent people that can build peace from actually pursuing it further. So this is a challenge that we'll circle back on. I'd like to now turn to Mimoun. You are working on preventing radicalization of youth in Germany. Can you share a little bit more about your work and how it contributes to peace in your society?
Okay. Thank you, Ilwad. So when we started this work in 2012, many young people from different ethnic minority communities who also came from, had a low income background and a low social status, joined radical groups, giving those groups the fuel to expand and their activities and grow. And at that time, many people were asking, why do those kind of young people turn into enemies in their societies while they live in a society where there is a social welfare system, where there is education, where there are many opportunities. And the truth was that those young people who joined those groups were it's a social phenomenon, so there are many reasons for their radicalization, but I would like to highlight two of them. So one aspect was that those young people, they didn't feel as part of their societies, even if they were born in Germany, for instance. And that's an issue that also has to do with integration and also to do with how are they accepted and respected by society. And I'm not talking about the bigger forms of discrimination. It was about the micro aggression forms of discrimination. So those young people had the feeling, or for instance, some teachers give them the feeling at school that they are not fully part of society. Maybe they had the same experience at their workplace. And so when they met those extremist groups, those groups gave them the feeling that they belong to something bigger. that they have a family, that they have and they can contribute to something. And the other part was that there were group dynamics that play a key role. So when those young people get together, then it's an explosive mixture of some who are violent, some who have a criminal background, and all of them share the same identity. And at that time, when we started with 180 degrees turn, we just trained young people from the target group itself and formed a network of those young people. And that gave us direct access to the target group. So we trained young people who may have met someone during the weekend who is already radicalized. And we did that with more than 200 people at the beginning. And through those 200 people, we reached a wide audience of young people whom we helped to get their place into society, whom we helped to tackle their discrimination. And through that approach, we became a movement that gets those young people to join her and help other young people. Yes, and that's mainly the thing that we did, and it grew by the years, and now we have different programs and projects. And I wanted to mention one aspect because it was very relevant what Ariza and Hassan shared. They mentioned the government. So in our case, when we started, we realized that in the prevention sector and the social sector, there is also some kind of industry. You have established institutions, their history goes back to more than 100 years in some cases. And then you have those minorities who are not reached by those institutions. They don't have the access to those minorities. So in our case, when we emerged, we were a voluntary initiative, and we did that for 3 years. And after 3 years, because we were motivated, we did that, and we loved to help other young people. But after 3 years, maybe we would have stopped our initiative, because there isn't, there is the power, but then it grows and you can't handle it. And at that point of time, the German government, they introduced a federal program at federal level, where they asked those initiatives like 180 degrees turn to apply for funding. And this is what we did at that time. And so we got established as an institution. That doesn't mean that we get funding for all our life. We get funding, we have to apply again. But the government is discussing right now to fund organizations and initiatives who fight against radicalization, who fight against xenophobia, anti-Semitism, hatred against Muslims, against far right-wing extremism, left-wing extremism. They want to fund them in a more continuous way, to make them stronger in their place. And this is something in their work, and this is what is even discussed. It is even discussed in Parliament, and was also a subject during the elections here in Germany.
Thank you, Mimoun. Although there's still so much work to be done, I definitely think there is a lot to celebrate as well, too. A lot of the new resolutions around youth peace and security actually express the frustration. The progress report on the implementation of the resolution 2250 also echoes this as well, too. Young people's positive role in peace building has been spotlighted, but there still needs to be a lot of work done for more governments to take on initiatives like the one you described, where they finance and support and champion programming led by young people in the peace and security space. I think your reflections and your work, particularly in Germany, is very interesting, because many people still look at violent extremism as an issue of the global South. A lot of the processes look at solutions for the global South, whereas looking at violent extremism, terrorism is a global phenomenon, and the opportunities for engaging young people needs to also be global. We constantly hear about the exclusion of young people. We hear how difficult it is for young people to access training, mentoring, funding. And I know that many of us here in this conversation today are actually paying it forward by setting up the Extremely Together chapters at the local level to also support non-formal organizations so they can be part of the peace building process. Hassan, can you tell us a little bit about the Extremely Together chapter that you lead in Uganda and how that idea came to life?
Thank you so much, Ilwad. Thank you. Yeah, in Uganda, we have this Extremely Together chapter that you and I, Ilwad, started through that first training in 2016, if I'm not mistaken. But I mean, it was the essence was for us to increase the participation of young people in peace building, but also in preventing and countering violent extremism. And this chapter has grown over the years. Me and Ilwa did the first training. We gathered young people from various sectors, those who are in business, those who are in school, in university, in political leadership, and those who are just, in informal sectors like in agriculture, those who are interested to make a contribution to peace building, because we believe it's a whole of society approach. We believe everyone needs to make a contribution. So these individuals were trained, 20 of them, and over the years, we've seen the group reach out to more other youth in their own small groups and organizations. They've trained others. They've used theater and art to communicate their role in peace, but also to expand to expand the message of peace on social media, but also in the different platforms at school, in churches, in mosques. I mean, it's amazing how far these young people have come, and now some of them are able to participate in global meetings and contribute to global discussions on preventing and countering violent extremism and also peace building work. Thank you.
Well, where I think governments are still a bit stagnant in how they build peace, young people globally are cooperating. They're doing cross-border collaborations and sharing their knowledge together that I think could serve as a shining example for other actors in the peace building space. Thank you, Mimoun, Hassan, and Ariza. Your inputs and insights into the different challenges you are facing and how they may vary from your different contexts has been very insightful. In the survey that we circulated, there's also been different questions that the participants have asked. And I'd like to turn our attention now to that part of the segment where I'll invite you to reflect on some of the questions our respondents have raised. Maybe we'll start with you, Hajar. How and where did you begin your activism in areas of conflict that needed resolutions?
Well, Ilwad, this question will take me back 10 years ago. It feels like a long time. It was in 2011. And at that time, as most of you know, in 2011, this year marks a year where there was many revolutions that took place in the Middle East and North Africa region. And the one that happened in Libya, although it started as a peaceful revolution, it was also accompanied by an armed revolution. So a war took place. And at that time, I was studying medicine. And I must admit, I was heavily influenced by Grey's Anatomy. And I completely thought that I'm going to end up becoming a surgeon, just like the ones we saw on Grey's Anatomy. And 10 years later, I'm something completely different. But I remember at the time witnessing the revolution and the war that happened parallel to it. Although I was living the war in itself, but my perception of it was completely different, because still you're heavily influenced by the narrative that you see on the news, and your idea of who are those that are affected by the war, it's still very narrow to the idea that those who get affected by the war are the ones who are at the front lines. So for an example, it's the soldiers who get injured. It's people who are at the front lines of the war in itself. Those are predominantly the one who gets affected. And then when the war reached my city, Tripoli, I volunteered to work at the hospital there. And from the minute I walked into the hospital, I sort of realized that no, there is a completely different story to what happened, that the war did not only affected those who went to the front lines to fight, but it actually affected many civilians themselves. I got to work with many civilians who, for example, were injured by airstrikes or the armed conflict and the fightings that happened in their neighborhoods. And I just remembered thinking that for the past few months, many of us, those Libyans who supported the change and called for the revolution and has been part of it, thought that, well, all what we need to do to achieve democracy, human rights, and peace is just to change a regime. And my time at the hospital was the realization that in order to build peace, to promote democracy and ensure human rights, the work needs to be done on the societal level and the political level. And that was what inspired me to co-found it together. We built it organization.
Thank you very much, Hajar. Well, some of the questions that we also received in the survey was, what can the average person do on a daily basis to contribute to peace building abroad? Recognizing that peace building is not just something that is done in conflict zones, but also in the developed world. Maybe Mimoun, you can unpack this question for us. What can the average person do to get involved?
Okay, I think this is a very important question, because we always have to ask ourselves, even after a long conference and long sessions, what is the takeaway? What can we do in our daily life? There is one thing that we train young people in our trainings, and this is that we ask them to be on alert and to take care of other young people. One example also strongly related to the issue of peace is mental health. There are so many young people and young adults and adults, especially after the long COVID pandemic, who suffer from mental issues. Often we have it in our surrounding environment, we have it among our friends, but because we don't know why are they depressed, how can we help them, how can they get treatment, because we don't know, we don't even recognize those mental issues, we can't help and we don't help. And this is what we need to do more. We need to spread awareness about mental health, about aspects of democratic values, about to make young people aware of the peace in their society and also the well-being of their constituents. Because I think if everyone is mentally healthy and happy with his life, then this is the basis of every peaceful society and the basis of a peaceful world.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask a question to everyone. Yes?
I can bounce a question back to you. You've been asking all the questions. What is the biggest single difference you plan to achieve by working on the principles for peace?
Well, thank you. I think that's a really important question, because all of us here in this conversation, we've been involved with many different processes. We've supported different resolutions. We do the work in our countries, in the field, yet we still talk about the challenges and the exclusion that young people face. So I joined this initiative to be a part of the new principles for peace building, one that is reflective of our realities, one that will inspire more involvement by young people. And this framework is proposing that by taking stock of what has failed, what has been achieved, and then developing the new standards that actually promote peace. It will result in a report by the end of 2020, but even more importantly than just text on paper, it'll serve as a roadmap that we can implement moving forward. And I think that you may share my sentiments as well too, that my country's been in conflict my whole life, and I don't want to see another 10 years or another 30 years of conflict. So we have to do things differently. Albert Einstein once said the ultimate form of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And that is how the global peace building process has been. We continue to apply measures and mechanisms that are not favorable to the new type of conflicts that we are met with today. And it gives me great hope when people like yourself and all of us gathered here in this conversation are willing to put our time into developing these new standards. And that actually is a great segue to my final question, and I'd like to give this to Ariza, is how do you plan to amplify the voices of those who are often left out of the conversation, where the lack of peace affects them the most?
Thanks, Ilwad. Supremely important question. And before I answer that, I just have to say we're so lucky. We speak English, we can relate to one another, we have internet, we have electricity, we have roofs over our heads, we're not worried about our next meal. Millions of the young people who are most affected by conflict don't have these basic utilities, don't have these basic human rights. So I think the first step is really to go out of our way as fellow youth, as fellow leaders, to listen to them, go down to where they are, talk to them, and really find ways to understand what their situation is like, not to impose any of the solutions that we or older people than us have in mind, but to actually think about what solutions they want for their situation, for their communities. So I think empathy is really the first step. And I think the next step is to give them the resources. So we've already talked about some initiatives where we were able to give out grants, leadership opportunities, training, and capacity building to these young people who are in conflict areas and who are most affected by conflict. But I think those are short-term solutions. Yes, they help and they have great impact, but we still have to think bigger. So one thing that we have to do is to create an ecosystem that allows them to actually live out peace sustainably. And that ecosystem doesn't just have to do with grants or leadership opportunities. It has to do with an education system that actually gives them the character and the values that can promote peace. Employment and livelihood that gives them opportunities to live a good, decent life and have good income. And even healthcare. You know, with this pandemic, we've seen that those who don't have good healthcare, public healthcare, are suffering the most, and it's really pulling people behind. And it's also to do with their families, their places of worship, and their communities, their local governments. So it's really building this whole ecosystem that can help them live sustainably in peace. And in doing that ecosystem, I think as well, we need to find more ways to give them not just opportunities to lead, but also opportunities to own these solutions and these new approaches to peace. As some people say these days that young people like us tend to think too crazy, we're thinking too much outside the box, we're going too much out of our comfort zones, and we don't know what we're doing. But I think that's where the genius lies. This ability to be creative and think outside the box is what might take us to new places that actually addresses conflict. Like what you said, Ilwad, that, you know, if this hasn't worked, then we have to think beyond. We have to break whatever's not been working, and we have to really think on our own terms. Back to you.
Absolutely. 5 years ago, the five of us were convened, and we had the opportunity to be mentored by the late but ever great His Excellency, Mr. Kofi Annan. And he told us that you are never too young to lead. And he tasked us with the huge responsibility of paying it forward, including more young people and teaching other youth that are the hardest to reach, that are never consulted or included in these processes, to access the different opportunities that we've had and ensuring that their voices are also heard. So it also gives me great pleasure that we sit here today having this conversation 5 years on and are still working towards that inclusive goal and celebrating the 5th year anniversary of the Extremely Together chapters globally. I want to thank you all so much again for joining this conversation, Hassan, Mimoun, and Ariza. And I'll turn back to you, Hajar, for a few more conversations.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you all. Thanks, Ariza, Hassan, Maymoon. And
welcome. You're welcome.
If anyone has more questions for Mimoun, Ariza, or Hassan, please feel free to use the hashtag peace on our terms. My final question will be to you, Hajar. And I would like to ask you, a question that actually came up in the survey. What would you rank current peace processes and the inclusion of youth? Do you think there's more that can be done? And what are the gaps? And why is it important to have youth being part of the peace processes? As you know, the conversation we're having today, the survey results, all of it is intended to actually develop some actionable recommendations and new principles for this process. What would you leave our audience with today as something that urgently needs to be done?
This is a very good question, Ilwad. And before I answer it, also remember that in the meeting you just mentioned, that our first meeting as Extremely Together with Kofi Annan, who also said, "Don't let me down." And this goes for us, the 5 who were here, the other 5, but also goes for every young person who was ever inspired by Kofi Annan, by him saying, "Don't let me down." But to answer your question, very simply, when it comes to peace processes, and it's important to be very specific that I'm talking about formal peace processes, I think they definitely need to be redesigned. And that's why with my organization, we launched a campaign called Redesign the Peace Table, because we want to see peace tables that looks like the societies that supposedly it represents. And this means that young people, women, and all other groups need to not only be included, but they need to meaningfully participate to influence the peace agenda.
Well, that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much, Hajar, for joining me in this conversation. And thank you to everyone who's contributed to the survey, who asked questions, who's given feedback, who's been commenting on the Peace on Our Terms hashtag. This is just the beginning, and we're going to have more series like this. To help us design the next event, we will share a satisfaction survey with you in the next couple of days. Please also share with us what you think should be the focus of the next event taking place in the next few months. Keep a lookout for other upcoming events by subscribing to the Principles for Peace website and following all of our social media channels. Thank you for joining this global collective effort. Every voice and perspective counts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilwad. And virtual hugs to you.
Hugs.
Exactly.
Bye.